So I welcome everyone here to the session. This one is the various rules that I have to go through. One is to remind people this is track A, and the session is A6, museums, memorials and travel, just so everybody knows they're in the right place. The way this will work is each presenter is given 20 minutes, and then I'll let you know at 3 minutes by saying 3 minutes, and then also when you've got 1 minute left, I'll say you've got 1 minute. And if you go over that, I'll probably won't mute you because it seems a bit rude. I'll just say, can you stop, please? The questions will all be at the end of the session. That's the key thing, not as we go along, and that's to help us to keep in time. And I'll be monitoring the time, and then there'll be questions, as I say, at the end. So the main thing is 20 minutes if you keep to that slot. And I've got the biographies of people, so I'll start with each biography, so the other people in the session know who's speaking. So that's all clear with everybody. The first person we've got is actually from Nottingham Trent. It's Dr. Stuart Birch, and he's a senior lecturer at Nottingham Trent and visiting professor at the Faculty of International Media, the Sino-UK Joint Institute of Communication at the University of China, and Nottingham Trent University. He's author of London and the Politics of Memory in the Shadow of Big Ben. So over to you then, Stuart.
Thank you very much. Before I start, just a little health warning. This paper is a tiny bit controversial and contains some bad language. So if that's not your cup of tea, then maybe go and make a cup of tea for 20 minutes. In London, near the Houses of Parliament and beside the banks of the River Thames, stand two large stones. Marked on one is Iraq and on the other Afghanistan, and wedged between the two is a bronze tondo. On the front, we can see military personnel poised for action, their eyes perpetually training the horizon for an unseen enemy. The other side of the disc is a strong contrast. It's all action. We can see a Westerner open-handed talking to some locals while a female journalist listens and takes notes. UK aid is being shipped into this region. A female doctor gives medicine to a small boy, and we can see girls studying at school. So the two sides to this coin can each be summed up in single words: duty and service. And thanks to the combined efforts of Britain's military and civilian forces, this rough part of the world has been made smooth, just like the faces of the two stone monoliths. This monument was erected in 2017, and it gives physical form to the official account of more than a quarter of a century of UK involvement in the Gulf. Last month, Boris Johnson became the latest in a long line of British prime ministers to insist that the decision to send troops to Afghanistan was justified. He pointed out that the fact that 3 million Afghan females had received education over the last 20 years meant that the 457 members of the British Armed Forces killed there had not died in vain. Johnson's version of events was swiftly contradicted by his key strategic partner, President Joe Biden. For him, the US-led coalition that invaded Afghanistan in 2001 was solely a counter-terrorism mission and was never supposed to have been nation building. He withdrew the remaining US forces after concluding that the, quote, decades-long effort to overcome centuries of history and permanently change and remake Afghanistan had been an abject failure. On the day that Biden made those remarks, one UK newspaper printed a photograph of a coffin containing a British soldier alongside the headline, "What the hell did they all die for?" The monument that I started with at the beginning was supposed to answer that question. The fact that it's still being asked suggests that it fails to adequately commemorate the war in Afghanistan. This paper proposes a more fit-for-purpose memorial. First, what form should it take? Should it be a conventional monument? Yes, because the catalyst for the 20-year conflict was the deliberate destruction of monuments. Al-Qaeda's assault on the Twin Towers was presaged by the Taliban's iconoclastic attack on the twin Buddhas of Bamiyan. The latter is a parallel example of the West's culture wars, which has similarly resulted in the toppling of contentious commemorative symbols. This demonstrates that all such markers have the potential to become problematic. It is inevitable then that an effective memorial to a divisive, costly, and protracted war will inevitably give rise to heated debate. Illustrative of this is Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and the history it recalls was brought to mind by footage of the chaotic exodus from Kabul, which was immediately likened to the 1975 fall of Saigon. Former US Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz said that the Afghan debacle was up there with Vietnam, unfortunately, and it may have repercussions as long as Vietnam did. The wound of that earlier defeat may have healed, but the scar remains, and this is evoked powerfully in Maya Lin's dark V-shaped gash. Unsurprisingly, this artistic response faced criticism, and it was deemed to be incomplete, which is why another artist was brought in to produce a conventional bronze statue, here the three soldiers. So a radical idea is likely to be more accepted if it has a figurative element. So the memorial I propose here will be just that, a traditional metal statue on a stone pedestal. So that's the form, but where should it be? Location is crucial. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial works so well because it's on the Mall in Washington, DC, and the arms of the memorial point to the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. So we need to find in Britain a similarly iconic landscape that has existing monuments. Trafalgar Square is the ideal example. And there's even a space available and marked out directly behind Nelson's column, because where those two ladies are looking, General Charles George Gordon used to stand there. His statue was erected in 1888. It was removed during the Second World War, and its current location is just down the embankment from the Iraq and Afghanistan Memorial. So a new statue to the Afghan campaign could be erected and placed in the spot where that statue once stood. That man was described by the Times newspaper in 1885 as a solitary figure holding aloft the flag of England in face of the hordes of Islam. He was a religious fanatic who aroused hostility and idolatry in equal measure. So a modern day replacement needs to be similarly totemic. A contender for that role to replace this man is Marine A. Marine A was a member of Britain's armed forces, and he was decorated for his services in Afghanistan. Hundreds of his comrades were injured or killed there. The shambolic events of recent weeks mark an ignominious coda to their sacrifice, prompting the British Prime Minister to insist that the UK can be extremely proud of what has been done in Afghanistan. Yet Johnson prefaced those remarks by saying that a military solution was and always had been an impossibility. Now, the results of sending troops to fight an unwinnable war is Marine A. This was the pseudonym given to him in the year 2013 when he was court-martialed for the point-blank execution of an unarmed, wounded militant, an action that he admitted at the time broke the Geneva Convention. He was found guilty of murder, sentenced to 10 years in jail, which was reduced on appeal and eventually overturned and replaced with a manslaughter charge on the grounds that the accused was suffering from an adjustment disorder brought on by combat stress. Now, in that appeal process, the appalling and barbaric circumstances of his deployment became clear. He had been let down by his superiors. They had failed in their duty of care. Now, when he was released from prison, this was celebrated by his supporters, but Marine A was not found innocent. He was and remains the perpetrator of an unlawful killing. Now, the idea of commemorating a figure like that is not without precedent. Now, a controversial figure that's been remembered by a statue is this. This is by the Norwegian artist Victor Lind. And the person you see here was the chief of police for Oslo during the Second World War. He was a secret member of the resistance, but he was also the man that sanctioned the transportation of hundreds of Norwegian Jews to the gas chambers. He was tried after the war and found innocent. Now, Victor Lind's statue deals with that history, and each face of the pedestal tells a different version of the story. The artist has called it the perpetrator, and his position is clear. He wants his statue to stand only so long as the not guilty verdict after the war stands. So if that was overturned, the monument's fulfilled its purpose and can be removed. Now, a statue to Marine A could deal with this person in a similar way, but it wouldn't have an authorial interpretation and it wouldn't sanction its own removal. Instead, the bronze statue of Marine A could be on a stone pedestal, and on the front of it could be the words A Marine. If you flip Marine A, it becomes an everyman figure. And on the other side of the pedestal, for some he's a hero, for others he's a scapegoat for the failing of politicians and the military establishment. And in the eyes of the law, he was a murderer, and then he became a manslaughterer. So visitors looking at this statue, decoding it, would mean that they would, of necessity, understand the complex circumstances. Now, this is imperative. Colonel Oliver Lee, a veteran of the Afghan campaign, he resigned over the treatment of Marine A, but he said that the lessons of that merit immensely careful scrutiny. The battlefields of the future will become ever more opaque and challenging, he said. So learning these lessons is so important. The wars of today and the future unfold on our screens and on our streets. Some have justified the 20-year-long campaign in Afghanistan as meaning that there hasn't been an attack by Al-Qaeda, but others have said that that has radicalized generations of people in Britain. And an example of that occurred on the 29th of November 2019, when convicted British terrorist Usman Khan stabbed to death 2 people. He was eventually shot on London Bridge. Now, the identity of the man who shot him was not revealed at the inquest into the killing. He was just given the name Officer XY99. And we saw what happened in the inquiry by the camera that was attached to his uniform. And his verbal recollection of what happened, he said that he made eye contact with Usman Khan and he said to him, "I've got a bomb." And Officer YX99 remembered thinking, quote, "You selfish cunt, you want to kill yourself and you're trying to get me to do it." And you start thinking of all different outcomes and scenarios and what you need to do next. So what happened on the streets of London in 2019 was a domestic version of what happened on the 15th of September 2011 in faraway Helmand province. Because on that day, Marine A came across a wounded militant and said, got out his pistol, shot him in the chest and said, "There you are, shuffle off this mortal coil, you cunt. It's nothing you wouldn't do to us." And then he turned around to his fellow officers and said, "This doesn't go anywhere, fellas. I just broke the Geneva Convention." Now, the policeman was deemed to have acted lawfully, but Marine A didn't. Those 2 men could be invited to unveil the statue to Marine A in Trafalgar Square. Now, of course, a monument like that would cause an outcry. Some would call it a woke monument, a politically correct one, an insult to the personnel that fought there and the families who grieve lost ones. But there's lots of ways you can argue against that. So first, a lack of consensus is essential. Our Prime Minister in Britain says that we must not turn our backs on Afghanistan. If we keep this monument in view, it will ensure that happens. Second, it will remind politicians of the essential need to make sure that we do not send our troops into an unwinnable war. Third, a monument in the touristic centre of London would speak to all the visitors, because these kind of events on battlefields, they've also happened involving soldiers from other countries. 4, we only know about these events because of the camera that recorded it. The policeman in London had an official camera, but the events that were recorded about Marine A was recorded illicitly by a camera on a head cam from another Marine. How many other stories have not been told? If we put a statue there, it would encourage a debate.
Here's this.
Fifth, memorializing Marine A would also feed into the culture war debates, but remembering while deferring judgment would mean that it would safeguard the monument from future iconoclasts that might have different points of view, because the monument doesn't have a settled definition or interpretation. Now, all this is necessary because we forget Marine A at our peril. Ignorance leads to a repetition of old tragedies. So today, the British Prime Minister says,
I don't know, like
that Afghanistan is seared into our national consciousness. But 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. Few Britons were aware in 2001 that they were sending British troops to Afghanistan, not for the first time, or the second time, or the third time. That was the 4th Anglo-Afghan war. So a statue to Marine A will prepare us for the 5th Anglo-Afghan War. And as Colonel Lee points out, that battle of the future will be even more opaque and challenging, because the wars of the future, they will be fought by soldiers far away. So a drone operator operating a combat drone from London would be making life and death decisions that would affect someone thousands of miles away. So a keyboard warrior like that in London could take a break from all this online killing and go to Trafalgar Square and look at that statue and think about the ethical decisions that that person had to make. And that monument that I'm proposing would be more serviceable than the existing one on the banks of the River Thames. So that leaves me with one question. Should that monument be removed because it's so misleading? No, because what it does do is it reminds us that at one time, in some places, in Afghanistan at the start of the 21st century, some girls went to school, some women were journalists. Will that continue to be the case in the future? But that monument on its own is not enough, because lots of other things happened as well. If the future generations have just got that to go by, they will have a very skewed understanding of a 20-year conflict. And it's for that reason that I propose a new monument to the Afghan campaign that commemorates Marine A and all the questions that it poses.
Thank you. That's very interesting, Stuart, and we'll pick up questions at the end. The next speaker is Meng Li, who is a second-year PhD candidate in Architecture and Urbanism Research Group at the University of Leeds. Her research field is innovative tools of heritage preservation and conservation. The topic of her PhD thesis is reshaping memory and identity with the concept of eco-museum, reconnecting the caretakers and imperial tombs of Qing Dynasty in China. Okay, so it looks like we're ready to go. So the same thing again, I'll appear 3 minutes before the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. And actually now I'm in my 3rd year and supervised by Dr. Jihan Selim. So today my topic is about memory, identity, and heritage in the context of China, which is also part of my PhD research. And first of all, in the presentation, I will provide a brief introduction at the beginning to clarify that why this topic is interesting and important. Then the case study of the caretakers at the Imperial Qing tombs and their descendants will be explained in detail. Also, I will mention the research methods adopted in this study. Since the conference was delayed for more than 1 year, actually, the progress has exceeded the context of the paper submitted to the conference. So at the end, I will also briefly describe some of the progress we've made so far. Okay, now we need an overall background of the research. And this study aims to respond to the 3rd objective of my PhD research. The overall project is to answer the questions about community participation, heritage, and eco-museum. A strong and specific case study is essential to make the project concrete. And the communities of descendants of the tomb caretakers at the imperial tombs of the Qing Dynasty are the case studies selected. So we can see that for the 3rd objective, 2 sub-objectives have been extended for this study to answer questions such as who were they in history, who are they now, and what is the connection between them to the tombs, what kind of memory and identity do they hold. As a result of the COVID-19, the in-depth fieldwork was postponed after a pilot fieldwork in China was conducted. So the paper submitted here is a response to the first sub-objective, and it mostly presents historical research based on desk work. And the second sub-objective, as I mentioned, was the new progress that was made after the in-depth fieldwork was done. Now let's see the case study. Okay, the fieldwork culture in ancient China has a long and complicated history. The Qing dynasty is the most recent dynasty, and the imperial tombs of the Qing dynasty are well preserved, which have been listed into the World Heritage Sites. And the descendants of the tomb caretakers are still living surrounding the tombs. This is the distribution of the tombs, and this study focuses on the communities at those two in Hebei province, this one and this one. Before ruling the whole country, the Qing region originated from the northeast of China, hence some tombs were constructed in Liaoning province today here. But compared with the eastern and western Qing tombs in Hebei province, the earlier tombs in Liaoning was smaller, and the structure of the caretakers group is also relatively simple. And these two constructions of the eastern and western Qing tombs started after the Qing ruling the whole country in Beijing. They were constructed throughout the period of the whole dynasty. Almost all the key members of the imperial family were buried in there, including the most famous emperors and empresses. There are many great architectures to show the strict hierarchy and the traditional Chinese feng shui culture. For instance, this tomb is the tomb of Emperor Shunzhi, a standard emperor's tomb from the front to the back, consists with 24 large and small buildings. And if it is the first emperor's tomb in the tomb garden, for example, this one, there were 3 more buildings in the very front, this 3-1 here. Compared with the emperor's tomb, 5 buildings were missing from a standard emperor's tomb, and each single building in emperor's tombs was smaller than that in the emperor's tomb. Well, tombs for concubines was the most simple. Okay, the formation of the tomb caretakers closely related to the construction of the tombs. People were moved and resettled to the areas surrounding the tombs. Because of imperial family needed them to look after and safeguard the tombs, the identity of them in history is complicated, which represented some positive signs such as nobility and glory, but sometimes some negative meanings like punishment or losing trust from the emperor. But for most people, it is benefited to be a tomb caretaker because it means get a job with a stable income like today's civil servant. They were placed in different departments to perform different duties, just like the picture shown here, such as safeguarding the whole garden, cleaning and repairing the buildings and space, or providing service for imperial sacrifice. In the late Qing, the population of caretakers at the Eastern Qing tombs was around 7,000 people. In short, they built their space, including the living space and the public space, and their identity there. But because of the changes of social and political landscape, they lost the support from the government since 1920s. Okay, after founding the People's Republic of China, they no longer assumed the responsibility of guarding the imperial tombs because the tombs were changed from the private property of the Qing emperors to the cultural heritage owned by the state. But their descendants still live in the same places, forming today's community of descendants, where there are still many unique memories and identities to be uncovered. In Figure 4, we can see the location of tombs in the Eastern Qing tombs, like this one here, tombs. And the dark areas around the tombs are the settlements of the caretakers in history. And in Figure 5, we can see that today the distribution of tombs and villages is almost the same as before, in which the descendants are living now. And in the Western Qing tombs area, the situation is similar. Although some new villages have been built, it is not hard to identify the original settlements according to the villages' names, especially in the Eastern Qing tombs area. And today, the Imperial tombs attract many visitors every year as a World Heritage Site that under the management of the state. These pictures were taken in my pilot fieldwork last year in the Eastern Qing tombs. We can see that some spaces and buildings are open to the public, for they are great examples of traditional ancient Chinese official architecture in Qing Dynasty. For the descendants of the caretakers today, they lost the connection with the tombs actually, and their living space have changed dramatically. Old buildings that carried the memory and identity are almost demolished. If you visit the Eastern Qing tombs, you will find this exhibition in Figure 11 here, but it does not live up to its name. Neither the content nor the layout is satisfied. In fact, this community still carried some culture elements and memories related to the tombs and the fading identity, which should be, but not be preserved as part of local culture and heritage. So the existing memories are very fragile, I think, and if we continue to neglect them, they will disappear soon. And overall, this study is a qualitative research, and I would like to explain some of the methods adopted in the to investigate these situations above. Okay, sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay, actually, the in-depth fieldwork was conducted in September, but before that, I did a pilot fieldwork in the area. This page shows that the methods adopted in the pilot fieldwork. You can see that there are in three aspects. First of all is some original archives and secondary documents. And I also interviewed some people there and observed one of four communities I focused on. But there are a lot of challenges actually I faced when I did this pilot field work in Beijing. First of all, I found that there are a lot of original archives is very hard to access, and sometimes when I interview my interviewees, I feel that sometimes they are not feel very comfortable to answer my questions. I suppose that these two challenges is not just occurred in my study, but it will happen in some similar studies in the same context actually. So it is actually very helpful for me to adjust the research strategy in the in-depth field work in-depth field work. So I need to find some plan B to just make up the shortage of, for example, the original resources. Okay, from now, I would like to present some latest progress that we've made. Because our in-depth fieldwork was delayed but resumed in September last year. I suppose that fortunately it is amazing progress to do this kind of in-depth fieldwork. And so now I would like to describe something about this. Okay, the in-depth fieldwork was conducted from September to November last year. And for communities surrounding the eastern and western Qing tombs were all covered. And 36 interviewees agreed to one-to-one interviews. I think that is very helpful and amazing. All the interviewees were descendants of the tomb caretakers, all from the associated community. Therefore, the questions were divided into 3 sections, as you can see, to investigate their memories and perceptions, and many kinds of material evidence were also collected along with the interviews. Actually, the interviewees will provide me a lot of clues to let me know where can I find the physical evidence. For example, the buildings, old buildings, and the old place that I can go there and take pictures. This process is quite useful and quite helpful to this research. And in addition, we got the support from the local government in one of the communities to conduct a consulting fieldwork. That actually that is unexpected, but I think it is due to our positive promoting attitude and working style of our fieldwork in the area. And a better relationship with the local government has enabled a more diversified and deeply participatory approach to the research. So we collect a lot of oral history in order to make up for the limitation of the shortage of original documents. And there were also the focus groups, community training, workshops, and community activities interacted between local children, and to understand the community's attitude or perceptions to their own both tangible and intangible cultural heritage. We also combined the community oral history and collected materials such as maps and photographs to mapping local history and cultural heritage to reveal the change process of the community. For example, in this picture, this is a map from the original archive, and we can see the old layout of the whole town, the area, and the communities provided for example, this gate in this red circle. The interviewees communities, they provided photos, old photos in 1950s. Yeah, these 2 photos, and we still can see this gate, but now there's nothing, this picture taken by me. So this is just an example. I mean that this kind of evidence to show that, to reveal that the changing process of the whole community, their living space and public space. And then we used reflexive TA to analyze the data one by one in strict accordance with the steps. So far, the data analysis related to this research research aim has been completed, and the data analysis for the whole PhD research is nearing completion. So now we know what happened to the descendants of the tomb caretakers after the Qing region ended. And we also found that in the dramatic changes of the social and political landscape, which of their collective memories have disappeared, why did they disappear, and what remains now. And we also found that the loss of collective memory directly affects the establishment of community identity. The local heritage and the cultural narratives and the preservation now is presenting a kind of fragmented appearance, because communities attempt to re-establish their identities. after the social stability by purposefully resembling the fragments of memory and culture. This also indicates that we do need to use the idea of eco-museum to reconstruct the local heritage narrative framework, which is another aim of the PhD project. Okay, a relatively complete conclusion of this study has been published as a book chapter recently, and more analysis will be presented in the final thesis, I believe. So for the limitation of the time, there are a lot of things, but I cannot present all of them. But if someone needs, I will share the book chapter with all of you, and that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Some interesting things to think, particularly to think around there on the analysis side of things, and also the use of qualitative methods. And we can get into that later. So, as our second speaker, our third speaker is Chris Reynolds. He's an associate professor of contemporary French and European studies at Nottingham University. His main research interests are in relation to the events of 1968 from the French, Northern Irish, and European perspective. In addition to a wide range of articles and chapters on these topics, he is the author of Memories of May 68, France's Convenient Consensus, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, France, and the European Collective Memory of 68. He's currently leading a significant project with the Ulster Museum on the question of Northern Ireland's 1968. Okay, then, Chris, over to you.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction. Like the previous speaker, things have moved on quite a bit since this paper was first proposed. You will see in the paper that things have been updated quite a bit. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to present this project, which has been kind of the focus of my research for the last 4 or 5 years or so. And has led to a whole range of different opportunities and projects. And the paper is entitled Engaging Audiences with Difficult Pasts. And it concerns a project that I led with National Museums Northern Ireland in their site called the Ulster Museum in Belfast, and deals with the question of Northern Ireland's 1968, but feeds into a much broader and important discussion about how we deal with the legacy of the conflict in Northern Ireland. So it's first of all important to outline that this project is grounded in the developing and developed role of museums in recent years. So the museums over recent years have acquired a much more prominent position in society, one that has seen them play a very significant and important role. And this is a role that I feel is increasing and becoming increasingly important with every passing year. So as museums have moved from that kind of traditional focus on objects and collections and moved more towards what could be described as a more audience-centered focus, one of the results of this is that they have become very prominent vectors in society with important roles to play. Anderson wrote in his 2019 text that museums indeed have taken on or have an ethical and a moral responsibility to take actions and to make the world better, stronger, and more just. And this speaks to this idea that museums are not just these places that pass down some sort of single voice interpretation on the past, but engage with their audiences much more and have a much more significant role to play in helping societies deal with some of the issues that they have, which are related to the past. And as a result of that, what we've seen is that museums are increasingly working with their local communities in order to engage those communities, to explore the relationships between the past in order to better understand their present. And maybe picking up on one of the things that Stuart said earlier on, in order to maybe provide lessons to avoid some of the problems of the past in the future. This has been particularly the case in those societies where communities are or continue to be divided by a shared but conflicted past. So often, for example, in post-conflict societies, whilst there may be peace, a very strong source of tension and problems that remains afterwards is the fact that there are still struggles over how we should interpret the past, and museums have increasingly been taking a prominent role in helping societies, post-conflict societies, deal with these difficult pasts. And in the case of Northern Ireland, which is the focus of this paper and this project, what we're going to see here is that that very much falls into that category of a post-conflict society where museums such as the Ulster Museum has a role to play in helping those societies overcome the problems of the past. And it's this more broad context that led to the emergence of the Voices of 68 project. So briefly, just to give you some sense, and hopefully most of you will be aware of this, so Northern Ireland very much has a very strong and difficult issue with the past, and it's something that's become a prominent and critical debate in the current and ongoing peace process in Northern Ireland. So there's been a long history of division and conflict in Northern Ireland, the latest episode of which is known as the Troubles, which took place between 1968 and 1998. So this period of sectarian conflict raged for almost 3 decades, leading to the death of over 3,500 people and leaving deep scars within Northern Irish society. The Troubles were brought to a conclusion in 1998 with the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And since then, over the last 20 plus years, Northern Ireland has enjoyed the benefits of peace as it moves towards some form of normality, and no one would argue that things haven't progressed, and things have moved in a very positive direction over the past 2 decades. However, there remain many issues that need to be resolved. You only need to look at the television, read the newspapers on a daily basis almost to see that the problems of the conflict remain in Northern Ireland despite the arrival of peace, whether it's Brexit, marching, police, violence, and so on and so forth. But perhaps one of the most challenging and the most relevant for this project is the difficulty of dealing with the legacy of the past. There is widespread recognition and acceptance in Northern Ireland that in order for the province to move on and secure a sustainable peace for its future, that a strategy must be created in order to come up with a way in which the past no longer remains a source of tension, because it is true that despite the peace that exists today, the tensions that remain in Northern Ireland are often channeled through the optic of the past. So the past provides the potential for Northern Ireland to once again be wrought with tension and create problems and feed into the tensions that continue to exist in the province today. That is not to say that there haven't been initiatives and attempts to overcome this, but it's largely accepted that from a state perspective, there is a deadlock over what that strategy should be. Within the space that deadlock has created, or within the void that deadlock has created, there have been a lot of initiatives, particularly at grassroots level, where local communities have been working in terms of how to overcome the difficulties of the past. And central to these grassroots activities have been the museum sector in Northern Ireland. And when you look at some of the activities that have been going on in Northern Ireland since the onset of peace, it is clear that museums have accumulated an increasingly important role as one of the most important vectors in helping come up with strategies that can feed into that process of dealing with the legacy of the past. And National Museums Northern Ireland, so my major partner in this project, has become become perhaps one of the most important players in that museum sector, contributing to debates about the legacy of the conflict, and in particular through its Ulster Museum, which is its primary site in the city centre of Belfast. And it's recently launched, well, recently, a couple of years ago now, Troubles and Beyond Gallery, which demonstrates its ability to come up with a critical approach to the past. And it's precisely this context that led to the emergence of the Voices of 68 project. So just to give a little bit of background on the project. So it started out with the publication of a book back in 2015, which sought to interrogate the absence of Northern Ireland within the transnational collective memory of 1968, in particular the European collective memory of 1968. So it had become apparent to me that Northern Ireland was often not included in that long list of countries said to have experienced a set of events in 1968, when in fact it did. And in that book, I sought to explain why it had been absent up until recent times, but also to challenge that absence and to try and write Northern Ireland back in to its rightful place on the long list of countries to have experienced a 1968. And when that book was published, I was approached by National Museums Northern Ireland, who were undergoing a bit of a renovation project of their galleries, and they asked me to help them reinterpret their displays dedicated to 1968 in Northern Ireland. And as a result of that, that kicked off a 3 to 4 year project, which led to the creation of a whole series of project outputs. And these included overhauling the permanent galleries in the Ulster Museum. It also included creating a traveling exhibition, which traveled all over Europe and to the United States. And it also led to the creation of a digital exhibition, which you can look at via iBooks. Alongside the exhibitions that we curated, we also developed an education program in collaboration with local curriculum bodies, where we created a set of educational resources that are now in use in schools in Northern Ireland to help teach about Northern Ireland's 1968, and importantly, frame it within that transnational perspective. And alongside the educational activities which continue today, there were a whole series of public events where we sought to engage not just the museum going audience, but the broader public in critical conversations about the different perspectives that existed out there in relation to Northern Ireland's 1968. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of the outputs. So here we have, so on the top left, this is the digital exhibition, which was on display. I think that was in Rome. This is the traveling exhibition, which was on display. I think that was in Liverpool. This was the first iteration of our changed exhibition at the Ulster Museum. This is the traveling exhibition in Boston College in the United States. This is one of our public events, and this was the temporary exhibition that was held to mark the 50th anniversary of 1968. And this last photograph is a photograph from our annual study day, which is held at the Ulster Museum, when 200 children, school children, come to the museum to visit the exhibition and engage in conversations with people who were present in 1968 and engage with the different perspectives that exist. This final image shows the installation of the Voices of 68 exhibition in the permanent gallery of the Ulster Museum, where it sits today. So if you ever have the opportunity to go to Belfast, you can go along and visit it. So when taking stock of this project, it was really important to try and understand why it had been able to expand, grow, and develop, and have as much success and impact as it did. And in order to understand that, I think we must take into consideration both the methodological approach and the underpinning theory that's used. So it's first of all important to point out that this study and the exhibition was grounded in the use of oral history. So we interviewed a wide range of people who were involved in 1968 from all different perspectives. The kind of general potency of oral history is well trodden. It allows us to uncover forgotten voices, marginalized voices. It allows us to tell the story from the bottom up rather from a top down perspective. And that's the case not just in Northern Ireland, but all over the world, and in particular in post-conflict societies where oral history is becoming increasingly used as a means to helping societies overcome their difficult pasts. And it's no surprise that in the context of Northern Ireland, in the void of some sort of state-led strategy to overcome the difficulties of the past, it's no surprise that there has been an explosion in the number of oral history projects that have taken place. So we tapped into the sort of general and the specific potency of oral history, and we put that on display, as you can see in these two images, both in the exhibition panels, but also in video testimonies from our protagonists. But in addition to the oral history approach, the other really important aspect of this project was its application of what is described as agonistic memory. So agonistic memory argues that we need to move beyond any attempt to achieve a consensual view on the past, because when we try to achieve a consensual view on the past, the logical outcome of that is that we push those perspectives that don't fit the dominant narrative to the margins. And as a result, we do not tell the full story. And therefore, this leads to certain people within that society feeling marginalized from that narrative and does very little to help us overcome the difficulties of a contested past. So what we did in this exhibition was that we actively sought out those perspectives or perspectives which were contested. So in the two images that you see here, these are two people who have two very different perspectives of many things, but in particular 1968, and we put those on display. We were careful to make sure that we had a spread of voices right across all the different perspectives that exist, but also ensured that there was a degree of balance between all of those different interpretations that are out there. And important to the approach was this idea of open-endedness. The exhibition did not tell the audience how to understand 1968. The exhibition and its outputs introduced our audience to the various perspectives that existed out there and was grounded in this idea of inclusive multi-perspectivity. And I believe that it was indeed this combination of oral history with agonistic memory which has helped this project become so effective and expand in the way that it did. So just to give you a few examples of some of the feedback that we had, just so that, you can be assured that it's just not me that thinks that it was effective. So obviously we've garnered a whole range of feedback over the period of the project. So in terms of its reception, this first quotation is really important because it comes from a visitor who accepts that hearing the different perspectives that are out there was actually quite unsettling, but also accepts that that is exactly what is required and that can lead to the opening up of a critical debate as to what happened in 1968, but also perhaps what happened more generally in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. If we move on to the second quotation, then this is from a host of the exhibition. It was in Belfast City Hall, and this quotation demonstrates that there's a readiness and a capability within Northern Irish society to now face up to the difficulties of the past. All too often, it's thought that perhaps Northern Irish society is not mature enough, or peace is not mature enough in order to confront the difficulties of the past. But this host actually says that what this exhibition demonstrated is that there is a willingness to face up to the difficulties of the past, and it does so because it presents all the different viewpoints and perspectives that exist out there. The third quotation is in relation to impact. So as I mentioned earlier on, a really important part of our sort of outputs was the educational strand. So we developed these educational resources and we work with schools and we have study days. And this quotation from one of our teachers really gets to the core of what we were trying to achieve. in the curriculum in Northern Ireland, it is often the case that teachers find it difficult to deal with teaching the contested perspectives of the Troubles. And what this teacher has said is that this particular project and its approach, by bringing together such different perspectives, actually made it difficult, that made it easier for the teachers to teach this very difficult period. And that was kind of the hope of what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to provide resources and an approach to local schools that would enable them to not ignore the difficulties of the past, but to confront them, and to confront them in a constructive manner. And this type of impact within the educational sector has fed in this fourth quotation, to some policy discussions. So there was a group set up called the FICT Commission, which was to write a report about overcoming some of the challenges of the past in Northern Ireland. And they have cited this project as an example of how we can, particularly through education, develop effective strategies to overcome the challenges of the past. So by way of a conclusion, it's by no means being suggested here that the Voices of 68 project and its approach is a panacea to all the problems that exist in dealing with the past in Northern Ireland. And it is true that during the iterative development of the project, we faced a number of criticisms and difficulties, but we were fully expecting that, and we were able to overcome those. It's not being suggested by any means that we could take the approach that we developed for 68 and apply it to other difficult moments within Northern Ireland, and there's no way that a one-size-fits-all approach is possible. However, what we do believe is that the effectiveness of the symbiotic combination of oral history and agonistic memory, as exemplified by Voices of 68, does merit exploration beyond this pivotal moment, and perhaps beyond the province itself. And that will be the next stage of my research. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sure people have questions about that later, particularly around the relationship between education and learning rather than being involved in a conflict. I think is quite an interesting thing I'll probably pick up on. Our final speaker then is Maram, and she's there. Yeah, I can see her. She's at that point, my chat disappeared with her.
I was sharing my screen. I just unshared it, so that's probably.
Well, hang on a minute. Chat was there a moment ago. Oh, there it is. Yeah, got it. Maram is a Carini architect and postgraduate research student at the Architectural Studies program in Cairo University, where she's done a master's thesis on festivals as catalysts of spatial transformation. Maram is the program's coordinator of Megawar, Built Environment Collective, and the assistant coordinator at its Athar Lina initiative. She believes in community-oriented architecture and is interested in community development and heritage industries. She has co-written and researched a number of UNESCO reports on the intangible heritage of historic Cairo and an edited book of architectural criticism. So thank you for sending that through to me on the chat. So now over to you. I'll appear again at 17 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased and honored to be a part of such a huge academic event. This is Maram Adel Arafa, an Egyptian architect with a bachelor and master's degrees in architecture from Cairo University. The case I'm presenting today is strongly linked to a personal interest of mine that have been developed over 8 years of work for a twin organization named Megawra, Built Environment Collective, and its Athar Lina, the monument is ours, initiative based in Al Khalifa district in Cairo. And focusing on projects of conservation, urban upgrading and development heritage education, awareness, and heritage industries. Therefore, I had the opportunity to take a closer look on the heritage-rich neighborhood, observe its local activities that reshape the physical setting of the city and the neighborhood on a daily basis, and witness its spectacular transformations as it accommodates local festivals. Over these years, I have witnessed this big event called Mawlid, which is the celebration of the birthday of different Muslim saints. I'm always impressed by the way these narrow streets and crowded squares can accommodate such an event, which raises my interest in digging up the value of these events, which assures their repetition for hundreds of years annually, and the scale in which such an event could possibly get affected and affect the physical setting of Al Khalifa area. Moving a step back to an initial question, what is so special about Al Khalifa neighborhood? Al Khalifa is located in the heart of historic Cairo, a registered UNESCO World Heritage Site. The area has 5 main entrances and a main spine. With the historical, social, and economic significance. This area contains a large number of mausoleums and vision shrines, which are domed buildings with no one buried in, but is spiritually linked to religious figures. These buildings in Al Khalifa are linked to religious figures and from the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad and other mausoleums dedicated to members of Egypt's ruling regimes and families across history. This neighborhood, like other neighborhoods of historic Cairo, has a thumbprint of almost every ruling family of Egypt since its establishment within the borders of the second Islamic capital, Al-Askar, in the Abbasid period. Its many listed monuments and buildings of value attracts local and international visitors for cultural, historical, or religious tourism. This adds a distinctiveness to the neighborhood for hundreds of years now, and this comes aligned with a remarkable social cohesiveness resulted in a community with special characteristics, culture, and traditions that are presented both physically and non-physically in every single detail in the daily life, including for sure festivals. These distinctive points adds a number of constraints on how to use and shape its urban, especially when it comes to listed heritage buildings and their buffer zones. Add to this its urban morphology, which is characterized by narrow streets and a lack of open spaces and public squares, in addition to the lack of basic services that any festival would require, such as resting places, shaded areas, public toilets, and so on. These spatial restrictions did not prevent the development of Mawlid festivals in Al Khalifa. It always occupy streets, open spaces, and narrow paths, transforming them temporarily and changing patterns of flow in them in a phenomena of interplay between temporal activities and their host settings that is worth of study for me. For this purpose, I had to theoretically identify the physical setting of Al Khalifa, study Al Khalifa as a place that is communally produced rather than space that is individually designed, which is the essential meaning of placemaking. So I decided to focus on a placemaking process occur in Al Khalifa during Mawlid festivals, because placemaking is respecting and focusing on the role of people and the role people playing in shaping the physical setting. This was for the purpose of balancing between both physical and non-physical appearance of the traditions in such a community. I'm applying theoretical studies on the work done by Atalan Initiative Al Khalifa and their mandate to deal with heritage as a driver for development. My case study is the Mawlid of Al-Sayyida Sukaina and a related educational hybrid module designed and implemented by me with teenagers from Al Khalifa residents to bring Mawlid tradition back to life using augmented reality technology. This module is named Listen to Procession, or in Arabic, Isma al-Zaffa. Well, at first, what does a festival mean? Festivals are communal events that celebrate shared values in certain communities that have unique spatial, temporal, behavioral, and symbolic characteristics that define the festival and its rituals. These characteristics are morphological translation of people's activities during festivals. This definition is highlighting a certain number of keywords that shape the morphology of any festival according to Fallacy, which are the rituals. Well, rituals are always framed by a spatial and temporal setting. They are acts or behaviors implemented by users of the community or from the community. They carry a bold symbolic message, and they finally form the building blocks of festivals. These rituals are of physical appearance when it comes to spatial context and the users, and non-physical representation when it comes to time, behavior, and symbolism. According to Fallacy, again, rituals could be any of these 8 groups of rites. What is important about these rituals that they are not limited to presenting traditions, but they are passing them down through generations and somehow safeguard local traditions through rites of exchange, which is an essential part of the role rituals play in almost any festival. Well, does this present in the festivals of Al Khalifa? The answer is yes. Al Khalifa district accommodates a large number of festivals that relate to religious, cultural, social, and heritage traditions. Here are some snapshots from religious and secular festivals that are all related to heritage and traditions, presenting them, passed them through generations and different groups of community, and disseminating them between a larger context. From this it is a traditional event that, like other has both religious surviving many spatial, security, and political transformations within Al Khalifa. It is a God representative manifestation of the social cohesiveness of Al Khalifa community. Roles are assigned collaboratively as community members contribute time, money, and effort to ensure the continued implementation of this festival annually. This festival has the largest spatial range of effect, with the largest number of affected building spaces and paths, the longest duration of continuous active rituals that usually last for 2 consecutive weeks. This behavior map is only showing the node of this festival, not the whole range of its effect. However, Mawlids of Al Khalifa missed a special and spectacular ritual in the past 15 to 20 years, which is the procession, or Zaffa in Arabic. The Zaffa is a procession which usually starts from a nearby significant shrine or mausoleum and ends at the shrine of the saint being celebrated. Excuse me. Al Khalifa Zaffa, the Zaffas or processions were cancelled for security reasons by authorities. Okay, each and every maquette, custom, card decoration, and sketch performance had a meaning and symbolism that people of Al Khalifa, the older ones, memorize with joy and passion every time you ask someone to tell us about their memories about Mawlids and Zaffa. Well, when I first had a round of interviews about Mawlids and Zaffa, I found out that not everyone knows enough information about them, especially the Zaffa. Younger residents, for example, do not even recognize them. This leads me to a couple of thoughts. First, it is the value of documentation research on Mawlids. The other one is the fact that there is a generation that is detached from Mawlids. Which means Mawlids are not playing the role of passing traditions properly anymore. As actions, I decided to end the memories of the residents of Al Khalifa using oral history methods, work with younger students and get them spread the word about Zaffa, and use virtual reality technology to keep Zaffa alive. And here is where the idea of listen to the procession or Isma' al-Zaffa module was born. 15 participants in the age group between 14 to 18 were introduced to oral history definitions, rules, and techniques. They were given simple but yet specialized readings to learn more about Zaffa and to stimulate their interest in certain topics, and have their own smaller oral history projects done, but should be related to the Zaffa. We use design thinking methodologies to develop their ideas about how will they use the knowledge gained to keep their tradition alive. Excuse me, could you hear me? The adhan is out there. Could you hear me properly?
Yeah, we can hear you still. Okay. I can still hear you. Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. I'll try to raise my voice. They were the participants were introduced to a number of lectures, readings, guided tours in the area, and wide range of visual resources, and had too many hands-on activities. Each participant were allowed to participate in this work in the way they prefer, giving them the opportunity to actively participate in designing a mural in their neighborhood that they will pass by every day in their walks through the area. They wrote, draw, made stencils, color, and etc. This effort resulted in a wall mural linked to a video that appears once you scan it with an augmented reality application on your phone named Artivive. This technology was first introduced to Al Khalifa during the tourism promotion event Spend the Day in Al Khalifa 8 in March 2021, when Athirlana Initiative collaborated with an artist named Agnes Mialchik to produce 5 augmented reality murals presenting daily life in Al Khalifa. This was followed by a professional workshop led by the same artist during in the framework of a project run by Athirlana named Athirlana Heritage Design Thinking School, in which she taught this technique to a total of 10 professional participants. 2 of these participants were mentorship the youth of in the Isma' al-Zaffa module, to develop their illustrations, formulate and implement the final product of the module. This process resulted in finally design. We stenciled it, sprayed it, and voila. I want to present the video. I apologize, it has no English subtitles, but I want you to at least enjoy the illustrations and the music. All drawings are illustrated by participants with the help of the 2 artists, Heba and Rowan. The soundtrack and the poem are produced by the participants. And here is the video.
it seems to have frozen and there's no audio from my perspective.
Yeah, that's the same for me. It's skipping along.
As a conclusion, in this study, I seized an available opportunity to fully document and analyze the Mawlid of Sayyida Sukaina before being terminated due to COVID-19, which highlights the importance of documentation research work on its own and the role it plays in different disciplines in the fast-changing world we live in. The case of cancelled Zaffa shows that tradition will disappear when everyone stops narrating its story, and present a successful example in which a local NGO was able to trigger a linked activity using oral history and augmented reality technology to keep the flow of passing traditions through a generation alive and bring the tradition back to life again. Finally, this work was based on my research work to fulfill the requirements of Masters of Science degree in Architecture from Cairo University. The augmented reality module and project is a hybrid module between two programs of different age groups within the second season of Aferlana Heritage Design Thinking School, run by Aferlana and the Built Environment Collective, funded by Drosos Foundation in collaboration with the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Thank you so much.
And thank you to all the speakers. I'm assuming now, when you stop sharing your screen, Maram, it will change its profile. That's right, yeah. So just before we get going on the questions, then, just a few thoughts from me. In this theme, there seems to be something very definite around commemoration, I would say. That seems to be something that flows through these presentations, which you'd probably expect, I suppose. But then what also crops up is this idea of how do we research things that are principally built through consciousness, because it's only through human consciousness that we build identities which then become very fragile. So we hear that people forget things. We've just heard that, and rituals get lost. And so we rely on oral histories, which has been mentioned a lot. And they themselves are very fragile and don't have, if you like, objective value in the world in the same way as a lot of the science, the scientific methods. And so for me, that just raised some really interesting questions to think about around commemorating things that are intrinsically fragile because they're dependent upon people's lived experiences, and because they degrade over time, we're left with authentic but non-generalizable results from a lot of this research, I would say, or transferability issues. So there's some of the things I've put out there as thoughts I had when I was listening to the various talks that people might want to pick up on. So we've got the panel here now, and a cat, which is always good to see. And the way, presumably this has happened in elsewhere, is what we can do is people who want to speak, do I have to unmute everybody? Is that the way? Or people put their hands up who are participants? If I go to my participant list. So we have here 19 participants in total. So if you put your hand up and then, or somebody just start off and then address your question to one of the panel, and also, and as the questions come out, try and balance across the different speakers. That would be useful. So who would like to start first? And let's see if this works. I'm looking for a hand to be shown to prove that this works. Anybody got a hand that wants to put up? Okay, it's okay. If they haven't, I'll start off with a question then about Marine A. And the question was, to what degree do you think it's the responsibility of those producing monuments, as you discussed, to educate future generations? Or is it merely a place like a gravestone, if you think, is it a place that marks someone's death, where people can go and reflect about their lives and deaths? Do you think monuments and memorials are more about education, which you seem to be implying? And how can they capture that in something that's often quite symbolic and figurative? I think the word you used, Stuart. So that's the Stuart. So I'll start off to get things going.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one way to respond to that is to draw a distinction between monument and memorial. So when you think of war memorial or monument, maybe you could think of a monument less as the place of death, but more as the kind of the public symbol of an event. But I think that was one reason why I included Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial, because it's not a war monument. It's the name of it. It's the Veterans Memorial. So unfortunately, all those listed on the walls are no longer alive, but the veterans are and were. So that it was deliberately a place to gather, so that the arms of the memorial were a place where you would walk down and reflect as you walked into the center of the memorial and out looking at the other monuments. So I think that is such an effective memorial because it's very respectful. It commemorates, but it also is a place of life and people gathering and leaving tokens and memorials. But I think that it's not just about a duty to educate. I just find that most memorials to war are beautifully designed, very ordered, they're controlled, they're symmetrical, they have neat start and end dates. I've never been in a war, but war is never like that they are fundamentally misleading. Very few of them capture anything of the killing and the chaos of conflict. So I think that was why I deliberately, in a polemical way, suggested a slightly different way that would take the traditional form, but do it in a questioning way. And your initial thought about how transferable are these things, that was another thing, that was a very specific event and the circumstances led up to that action. But you can compare that with the heat of war in any conflict. And if you read, for example, the Australian Ministry of Defence released the Brereton report, and that reveals some very unfortunate actions by the Australian elite forces in Afghanistan. So tourists coming to London, they could look at those memorials and reflect. And also memorials tend to perpetuate the conflict. It's all about, this is us, we're commemorating us. So even when the war is over and the peace is signed, or people have forgot what they were fighting about, they're still very exclusive. So I don't know if that answers your question, but they are symbols of power and authority, and they influence how we understand the past. So I think that with a conflict like that we see the consequences of war. So I think that suggesting another way of commemorating it might be a way to open up the debate.
Yeah, I agree. I won't hold the thing, but it reminds me of the sort of all the First World War poets, and the sense that in I can't remember which one it was now, where he goes, gas, gas, quick boys. You get a sort of sense of the horror, drowning in lime. I think the line is somewhere. And in sort of poetry, you can get a sense of that chaos, that movement, the messiness of the thing. And as you say, when you look at a typical war memorial, it's a very beautiful, solid thing that doesn't move. It just stands there. It doesn't really capture that. We'll go on to other people's questions then. Can somebody who's not on the panel pose a question? Presumably, I don't need to do something with this computer to allow people to pose a question. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They should be good to go. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andrew. My question to Maram for the presentation about the Moulid in Egypt. Thanks a lot, Maram. Really impressive, really fascinating. Probably you know that I'm a real researcher, deep researcher on Cairo, so you're taking me back to the place that I most love. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I'm so interested in the way that you're trying to bring back memory and revive practices and traditions that are no longer practiced and no longer existent. And my question is, I think you have adopted a really good methodology and a good way of interacting people with that. But my question is, how successful are people really taking back that memory back and interacting with the virtual reality model that you're doing, with the interactive activities? Are you receiving a lot of attention towards that? Is it working well? Did you find any challenges with the people coming back and working with you on that and creating and bringing people even to know about what you're doing? And the second part is that, do you think that will be a more successful model to be implemented again on other vanished practices in Egypt? Because there are plenty of those. And if you try the model and it works, why not adopt it in other ways as well?
Thank you for your question and your interest in this topic. This work is not an individual effort of mine. Othellana is working here in Al Khalifa since 2012. They built so strong channels of trust and really we have
I know them. I know mine very well.
Okay, so this explains.
I know mine very well.
Yes. They love to experiment new things with Othellana. They know us. They know we are doing. We are not using them for our benefit. So this makes the job very easy for anyone to try something new with the people of Al Khalifa. We are now trying to expand our work, especially in the educational programs, because we have a really long experience in these such models or projects. But this particular project or activity could not be implemented outside Al Khalifa because it's about their memories. We can. I don't think that I could raise this idea in other place without working for this long in the area, or without engaging that long with the area. From my work as an architect with Mail Ibroshi, for my master's thesis. So I think it's important to be implemented regionally and in other places, but I don't think I would be able to do this. We might share the methodology we use, and we are keen on doing this in on many levels. To others with expertise in other places to do this, in other neighborhoods or contexts.
So is it more successful locally within Al Khalifa only, or is it more stretching outside of Al Khalifa? Are your visitors in the community only with Al Khalifa?
We are expanding بس برضو around Al Khalifa.
Yeah.
We are now in Imam al-Shafi'i, in Al-Hataba, and other related. They are all in the Al Khalifa district, but they are related to Al Khalifa. And something that is interesting about Al-Azhar Lana, that we don't do that flash project and go away. We are here to
We're sustainable
community, community focus groups, and do need assessment, and we implement some pilot project, and then widen the effect of the project, and then assess it, and evaluate our work and rework it when possible. So I don't think that I can just go somewhere and do this exercise and I call it a success story. The success story is linked to this long journey.
Right.
This is in my opinion.
And it's very unique to Al Khalifa community.
I hope so.
Okay. My other part of the question, Andrew, is it okay just to follow up another question?
Yeah. Since there's nobody else to hand up, yeah.
All right. So what we faced when working with very local communities, Maram, is the challenges of using technologies, like must have smartphones, must have certain ways of engaging, of accessing. I was just having a technology exhibition 2 weeks ago in Jordan with a very remote local community in northern Jordan. And that was one of the big challenges we had, is access to technology, access to smartphones. How is that happening in your work in Al Khalifa?
We faced this particular challenge since COVID-19, when we was very keen on continue our educational component with the students without gathering them and كده نعمل حاجة غلط. So we introduced them, the youth participants particularly, to Zoom, WhatsApp, and other كده basic applications to be able to communicate with them. And we have this recommendation back in 2020, I don't think, 2011, when the people of Al Khalifa asked us to start with the younger residents. And this is always the solution. When we face, when we want to introduce something new to the neighborhood, we start to introduce it to the younger residents. We have very wide activities targeting different age groups, starting from 7 years till the older ones. So the younger students talk to our participants, talk to their parents that we need to have an internet connection. We need to download this application. We need to follow up with the teachers in Azhar Lana. We need to do, and they are introduced to this. We organize community guided tours through the wall murals designed by Agnes Mihalchik I mentioned. And for this mural, we implemented it next to a shop of one of the craft persons of in Al Khalifa that is in our network. And we asked him to get his mobile phone ready for anyone passing by the street and is very curious to know what is this, to scan it for them and wow, what is this? It's very unique and has a magical effect on the people of Al Khalifa. So that's the solution we had for this issue.
Okay, very good. No, very good. Well done. I can feel the passion in your conversation and your reply to me. So very well done. Just to note everybody, if anybody's in Nottingham or around Nottingham, I just arrived to Nottingham 2 hours ago and went to the exhibition at Nottingham Castle. So I just advise everybody to go and see it. It's completely different to see it in person from the virtual tour yesterday. So just have a half an hour visit and go there. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks a lot, Maram, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. That's a good pitch, because it's a great venue, because it's been recently renovated. So and you get
Yeah.
great views in Nottingham as well, because you can walk around outside.
Yeah, just had the tour myself 2 hours ago and went to see the exhibition. So it's really fascinating. Well done to everybody.
There's a question here that's been posted to Meng. During your PhD, have you reflected on your role as a creator of new heritage? Researchers of the future will look back on you as part of history itself. So have you kept a research diary, and have you archived your raw data so that it can be repurposed in the future? That's a good question, isn't it? It's interesting to know how you respond to that.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Actually, just as you said that, what I was doing, I mean, in the case study, in this case study, actually, as something that you can never read or you can never see in any other resources or documents or archives. So that is, I think that is a part of my contribution too, because this is actually one of the original contributions of my PhD project, to produce some new record or some new documents to this group of people and their stories and their changing process. So I think, yeah, I think that is part of my role to create. Yeah, maybe it is part of the heritage in the future. Yeah, I think so.
Does that respond, Stuart? Because Stuart kindly posted that question in the chat.
Yeah, that's a great response. It just, as you were talking, it made me realize, a bit like one of the panels I went to earlier, that we're not just separate from the things that we're researching. You're a part of the picture. And that when we look back in the past at all these strange people and what they did, it's easy to forget that one time in the future, people will look back on us and try to understand us. And what was she doing? Why did she ask those questions? Look at the weird technology that she's using.
Yeah.
And they were, back in 2020, 21, they were obsessed or interested in this, and they didn't talk about that. So I think that's so interesting. To maybe another part of your research is you could do something that's very reflective about that and the process of doing it and how it's changed you.
Yeah,
that would be very interesting, especially in this time of China's history. It's such an interesting time, I think.
Yeah, because I think that period, I mean the whole Qing dynasty, and because actually we all know that during this dynasty there is a very great moment for the whole country, but then they just cut down and another new government just stand up. This kind of, changes, I mean, the social and the political changes for the normal people or the special people or special group of people like the caretakers, because they just looks like the people belongs to the past, not now. But today they're still living there and they have a lot of stories or memories, actually the feeding identities. But actually you can see that they are just try to retrace their old identities. For me, sometimes, I just very inside the part of the group. And I just think, oh, okay, what an amazing story that they're telling me. But this kind of things we will never read and to see in other places or literatures or archives. But now I can record them and to let people know. I think that is great.
Exactly.
It's the meaning of the research. Yeah.
Yeah, to be in that privileged position. It links to Chris's thing, use of oral history. Chris, when you speak, I mean, where you're from and your accent, did that ever come in? Did people immediately say, well, who are you and what's your background? Or did you feel a part of it, or did you try to keep separate?
It's an interesting question. So I've always said that the fact that I'm from Northern Ireland actually helped me in this project, because what happened during the Troubles and the legacy that's left is really quite complex, sensitive, and difficult for people. And understanding those nuances and understanding where you can and can't go, and some of the subtle sort of codes that people use when they're talking about their identity and talking about the past, that comes from being from Northern Ireland in a way, and so aligned with your expertise as a professional historian and so on and so forth. So I do think that it was an advantage, but I had to be very, very careful about it as well, because everybody from Northern Ireland is from one community or another. So I had to play a very clever game of not giving away too much about who I was and which community I'm from myself, which wasn't too difficult to do because I've lived away from Northern Ireland for long enough now to have a certain degree of distance and be able to not sort of give away too much about what I perhaps feel about the past and what I perhaps feel about the way things should or shouldn't have happened. So I had to be very, very neutral as possible in that, because, you know, people are very distrustful of talking about the past because they feel as though, you know, that you're on one side or the other. And I do think that there were some people who kind of decided very early on that I was from one side or the other, and that might have influenced what they said to me. But in the majority of cases, it didn't really pose a problem. And the fact that it was a National Museums project meant that it came with a certain degree of credibility, that people trusted the project and trusted the institution, which perhaps helped me overcome any of those doubts that people had. So I think it was a juggling act between sort of playing off the advantages of being from Northern Ireland, whilst at the same time not falling into the trap of people thinking that I had an agenda, because that was the main thing. In order to get those multi perspectives, you had to create that narrative hospitality that is so important in a project like this, where people who perhaps felt as though their narrative didn't belong in the traditional narrative of 1968 felt as though they had a place. And that's what we were trying to encourage, and we managed to do that. When we look at the range of perspectives that we had, we went well beyond the kind of dominant sort of usual suspects, and we're able to kind of get perspectives from people who perhaps up until that point didn't feel as though they belonged in that story. Because a bit like everything in Northern Ireland, certain moments in the past belong to some communities and certain others belong to other parts. And what we were trying to do is say, no, all perspectives need to be understood in order for us to really take stock of what took place and learn the lessons of that. So we wanted to get beyond that, you know, 68 belongs to the nationalist community. It doesn't. I mean, it's understandable why some people might think that, but in order to truly understand it, we needed to get both sides. So I think it was important that I came from Northern Ireland, but at the same time, I was able to be neutral. And lots of people did tell me afterwards, you know, because the participants became, you know, the interviewees became participants in the various strands of the project, and you know, you get to know them, and a lot of them did tell me that they have no idea which side of the barricades I'm from.
Chris, can I interject there?
Yeah.
It links actually as well to Meng's work with schools. I'm interested to know the sort of degree of tribalism and group identity to what degree, and you might not be able to generalize about it very well, I don't know, how has that been weakened with school children and young adults today? Are they still as grounded in that, or is it all weakened and they just see it as part of a history, but it doesn't really define them in the same way as their parents?
No, it's still very much perhaps one of the fundamental problems of contemporary Northern Irish society is that the education system is still very much divided into two communities. So, you know, Catholics go to Catholic schools and Protestants go to Protestant schools, and very few schools mix. There are more integrated schools, as they call them, back home, but one of the fundamental problems is that young people grow up in their communities. So a young Protestant will grow up in a Protestant community and he'll go to a Protestant school and he'll be told the Protestant narrative of the past, in the same way that a young Catholic will grow up in a nationalist background. He'll go to a Catholic school and he will be told his nationalist narrative of the past. And as a result of that, sometimes education can reinforce the divisions that exist rather than overcome them. And what we tried to encourage in this project was to create resources that could be plugged in to whatever school it was, but encouraged young people to listen to perspectives that they'd never really heard of before. So when we held our study days, or when we hold our study days at the museum, what we do is we basically get these school pupils to come to the museum and we present them with a range of perspectives on 1968. So people who we've interviewed from the various factions of Northern Irish society do a brief talk about their perspective of 1968. And it's unbelievable, because some of these people have never heard that perspective on 1968. And what we're doing is we're saying to them, listen to this, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions. And it's perhaps the most beneficial part of the entire project, is that what we're seeing is that young people are actually, they're able to challenge the sort of familial community narratives that they've been fed perfectly understandably since they've been brought up, and it enables them to actually see beyond that. So it's a stepping stone towards trying to come up with a way in which we can bring young people together, because until that's done, honestly, Northern Irish society is going to struggle. But I don't think Northern Irish society is ready just yet for a completely integrated system. So this sort of project will kind of build towards trying to encourage a kind of much more multi-perspective approach in the past, rather than reinforce those tribal narratives, I suppose.
Well, I'll pick up this conversation with you another time, because I'm also interested in the degree to which theology and church are part of the problem or part of the solution, but we won't go there now. Because
that's a different conversation altogether.
Deb has got a question. She's got a hand up.
So I really enjoyed all the papers, and I did pick up the thread. It was a really interesting thread, and I'm sort of trying to position myself in some of those places, and one has all the arguments in one's head. But I think, Chris, for me, I found your paper very compelling, because I come from a country of deep contestation, and when you talk about tribes, it's not just tribes of race, but tribes of ethnicity within race, and it starts becoming a very, very complex series of issues. And my sort of experience has been I've worked in museums or worked with organizations in which the dominant narratives have changed in my lifetime, and one has had to relearn narratives. But also what's happened is that the national school curriculum is very much pushing exactly the narrative of the opposite. And one of the big problems in South Africa today is actually trying to enable balanced narratives, which is politically distasteful. But also at the same time, it does mean that the country remains very fractured, because the sense of, I suppose, retrospective thinking or reflection doesn't exist. I think my question to you, and this is in the light of, I suppose, the recent Black Lives Matter depredations, as one could call it in the UK, but also with the fact that the world's changed so dramatically in the last couple of years politically. How resilient are you to being able to let your museum flux with that change and continue telling a story that doesn't become dominated by flare-ups of ethnicity on either side of the barricades? Because I think those are the sorts of things at the moment which are very, very tenuous, particularly given the Brexit situation in Europe, etc. And, you know, has any of this been flagged for you? Or is it something which may yet rear its head?
Thanks for your comment and your question. So I think that what I would say is that I'm very fortunate to work with, in particular, closely with National Museums Northern Ireland, that have a team of people who are very, very committed to coming up with exhibitions, programs, educational facilities, educational programs that are committed to critically assessing and helping deal with the challenge that is the past, because all the things that have happened, particularly since 2016 and Brexit, have demonstrated actually that the tensions in Northern Ireland haven't gone away. Despite the fact that peace is there. So Brexit is the perfect example. You know, Northern Ireland has become kind of the most difficult and sensitive part of the entire Brexit debate and risks undermining the entire thing. But what it has done is that it has exposed the divisions that exist in Northern Ireland today. So what I would say is that those sort of convulsions of Brexit, of COVID, of emerging protests around Black Lives Matter or whatever else, have actually reinforced the need for institutions like National Museums Northern Ireland, academics like me, but also lots of grassroots activity organizations who are committed to coming up with effective strategies on the past. So I would say that we have felt the impact of sort of current events, whether Brexit or COVID or whatever. But I think that what they've done is demonstrated the necessity, actually increased the importance of coming up with strategies, because the more fragile that peace is in Northern Ireland, the more risk there is that it'll be undermined by factors such as Brexit. Absolutely. And in order to strengthen that peace, we need to come up with effective strategies. And one of them, I believe the most important, is making sure that we come up with a way in which to have a sustainable, strategic approach to dealing with the past. Because if we don't, the past is going to be one of the biggest problems in our future.
Thank you.
My
Thanks.
pleasure.
Right. I just want to thank everybody for all their work in the preparation of this and doing it online. I think the message in museums, memorials, and travel is the role academics can play in diffusing tensions through knowledge. And it's like lots of people, the more you mix with what you perceive to be your enemy, the more the tension dissolves, because then you realize, well, they're just human beings with different opinions. And whether we're doing this through time or through space, I think engaging in dialogue and using memorials, workshops, study days, documentary evidence, and having an impact on curricula all help actually to, in a very practical way, I think, make the world a better place. And I think that's the value we have as academics. So on that point, I wish you well for the next half an hour where you've got a break before the conference starts again. I think I'm correct in saying at 6:30, where I'm presenting a paper. So I know it's 6:30. Otherwise you'll be on the line telling me off. Okay. Thanks, everybody.